It's quite something, isn't it? How often these potential Russia-Ukraine peace talks seem to bubble up again.
Yes.
And this week, well, the diplomatic activity feels particularly intense. We're seeing the usual key players, Putin, Zelensky, Erdogan stepping up again.
Right. Turkey's often in the mix.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And Trump's weighing in, plus European leaders, of course.
It definitely shows there's still a persistent push, maybe, towards finding some kind of resolution, however tricky it is.
Absolutely. And tricky is the word.
Yeah.
That's exactly what we want to dig into in this deep dive. We've pulled together various sources, news reports, analysis, even a timeline, all focused on these proposed talks.
Okay.
Our goal, is really to get past the headlines and give you a clear picture of the conditions being floated, who's playing what role internationally, and, well, what the real sticking points actually are.
Sounds good. So where do we start? Putin's proposal seems like the main trigger this time.
Yes, let's start there. On May 11th, Putin put forward this idea of direct talks in Istanbul, suggested starting this Thursday, May 15th, and the initial spin or framing was that these talks would be without preconditions, which, on the surface sounds potentially positive.
It does initially, like an open door. But pretty quickly, we got a really important clarification from a Kremlin aide, Bashakov.
Ah, right. What did he say?
He made it clear that Russia sees these talks needing two foundations. First, the discussions they had back in Istanbul in 2022.
Okay, the early ones.
Yes. And second, the, quote, current situation on the battlefield.
Right. Okay, let's unpack that a bit. Yeah. Those 2022 Istanbul talks, they were quite early on, weren't they? And didn't really go anywhere concrete, as I remember.
That's right. No lasting agreement came out of them. And based on leaked documents from back then, Russia laid out some pretty hefty demands for Ukraine.
Like what?
Well, things like a massive cut to Ukraine's military down to maybe 50,000 troops, giving up all long-range weapons, and recognizing Russian control over Donetsk and Luhansk. It wasn't just about land. It was aimed at sort of fundamentally changing Ukraine's position, making it neutral, demilitarized, basically a buffer state influenced by Russia.
Those sound like incredibly difficult terms for Ukraine to even consider, especially that early in the war.
Extremely difficult. And there was more. The draft apparently required Ukraine to reinvest in those Russian-controlled areas, but on Russian terms.
Right.
And even bring back Soviet and communist symbols legally within Ukraine. Keith Kellogg, who was the U.S. envoy then, called the demands fairly significant on a very weakened Ukraine.
So fast forward to now. Putin is essentially saying, let's restart talks based on those terms, but also factor in all the territory Russia has gained since then.
That's precisely the implication. And Russia's wider aims don't seem to have shifted much. They still want Ukrainian troops out of all the areas they partly occupy. Formal recognition of the annexations, including Crimea, a constitutional ban on Ukraine joining NATO, and changes regarding Russian language and the church.
Okay. And the ceasefire question. That always seems to be the first hurdle. Where does Russia stand on that now?
Yeah, that's a major point of difference. Russia's been very explicit. No ceasefire before talks start.
No ceasefire first.
No. Their argument is they need to address the root causes first, by which they mean primarily what they see as Zelensky's pre-war actions and, of course, NATO expansion.
Got it. So, Russia's position, talk first, based on our terms and current gains, then maybe discuss stopping the fighting. How did Zelensky respond? There was some initial reaction, right?
There was. Initially, Zelensky called the proposal itself a positive sign, maybe suggesting Russia was finally looking for an off-ramp.
Okay, a glimmer perhaps.
Perhaps. But Ukraine's core position is absolutely solid. Any real negotiations have to start with a full, unconditional ceasefire. That's the non-negotiable first step for them.
And they actually proposed a specific time frame for that, didn't they?
They did. Zelensky called for a complete, lasting ceasefire starting Monday, May 12th. And this idea got strong backing from European allies, too. They pushed for a 30-day unconditional ceasefire starting that same day.
So a coordinated push from Ukraine and Europe.
Yes. And Zelensky said he'd be ready to meet Putin personally in Turkey on the 15th if Russia confirmed the ceasefire first.
So right there, that's the fundamental clash.
Right.
Russia, talk first. Ukraine and allies, stop the fighting first.
Exactly. And it's no wonder Ukraine looks at that 2022 draft agreement, the one Russia wants to use as a basis, and sees it as, quote, tantamount to capitulation.
Yeah, you can see why. Given their goals are still about regaining territory, getting reparations, dealing with Crimea's status.
Precisely. Objectives that just don't align with the Russian starting point, unless there's, huge external pressure or a dramatic shift on the battlefield.
Okay, so the two main parties seem worlds apart on the entry conditions. What about the international reaction more broadly? Turkey's offered to host again.
Yes, President Erdogan is putting Turkey forward as a host, offering assistance. The Kremlin even put out a statement saying Erdogan gave his full support to Russia's initiative.
Full support. That sounds quite pro-Russian.
It does in the Kremlin's telling, but, and this is really important, Turkey's own statement after the Erdogan-Putin call stressed the need for a ceasefire before any real peace talks could begin.
Okay. So Turkey's public stance aligns more with Ukraine and the West on the ceasefire timing.
It seems so. While they're willing to be the host, their condition mirrors the Western one. It highlights Turkey's really tricky position.
Right. They're a NATO member. They support Ukraine's integrity. They've sent drones. But they also keep close economic and political ties with Russia, haven't joined sanctions. It's a real balancing act.
It absolutely is. Driven by their own regional interests, Black Sea strategy, competition with Russia elsewhere, like Syria, it makes them a potential mediator, but a complicated one.
Okay. What about the U.S. and the big European powers? Have they been pretty unified?
Yes, largely. A very clear rejection of talks without a ceasefire first. They generally see Putin's May 15th idea as inadequate, maybe even just a tactic.
Right.
We saw that display of unity in Kiev Macron, Merz from Germany, Starmer from the UK, Tusk from Poland, all meeting Zelensky and jointly calling for that 30-day ceasefire for May 12th.
A strong signal. Now, Donald Trump has weighed in too. What's his take? It can sometimes be a bit different.
It often is. Trump has urged immediate direct talks, which sort of lines up with Putin's timeline idea.
Okay.
But he's also backed the 30-day unconditional ceasefire concept. He made a comment along the lines of, if a deal isn't possible after that, then the U.S. and Europe will know where things stand and can, quote, proceed accordingly.
Interesting phrasing. Proceed accordingly.
Some read that as implying a tougher stance if talks fail. And there's always that background noise, unconfirmed reports about potential U.S. interest in Ukraine's mineral resources potentially playing a role in his thinking.
Right. And haven't there been hints, maybe from others in the U.S., about patience wearing thin?
There have. Senator Rubio suggested the U.S. might need to move on from focusing so heavily on peace efforts if there's no progress soon, citing, other priorities and saying, it's not our war.
Oh, okay.
Though, interestingly, Keith Kellogg, who we mentioned earlier, he's also come out in support of the 30-day ceasefire first idea.
So it seems even those inclined towards talks see the ceasefire as necessary first step.
Many do, yes. It really highlights the different ways Putin's latest proposal is being interpreted.
How so?
Well, you've got people like Peter Mandelson, former UK ambassador, who's very skeptical, sees it as just a ploy to weaken Ukraine's sovereignty.
Right.
Then you have the Kremlin spokesman, Peskov, calling it very serious, aimed at those root causes.
The official Russian line.
Exactly. And then many analysts in the middle suggesting maybe Putin's just playing for time, trying to consolidate gains, or perhaps it's just a PR move for the global audience.
A whole spectrum of interpretations. So if we pull all this together, what are the biggest roadblocks stopping any real negotiation from even starting?
Well, the absolute immediate one is that fundamental disagreement on the ceasefire timing. Talk first or ceasefire first. It's a complete deadlock right now.
The entry ticket, basically.
Exactly. Beyond that, you have just vastly different demands on territory and sovereignty. What Russia wants, Ukraine simply cannot accept, and vice versa. There seems to be almost no common ground there. Then there's the trust issue. Huge lack of trust, especially from Ukraine, given Russia's history with agreements.
Understandable.
Ukraine's desire to join NATO, that's still a non-negotiable red line for Russia. And of course, the simple fact that the fighting is ongoing makes any kind of trust building or serious diplomacy incredibly difficult.
It really does paint a pretty bleak picture for any immediate breakthrough, doesn't it?
It does seem quite improbable in the near term.
Okay, so just to recap this deep dive for everyone listening, Russia's put talks on the table, potentially for May 15th, but based on terms from 2022 plus their current military position, and crucially, without stopping the fighting first. While Ukraine, backed by many key allies, is saying absolutely not. There must be a full unconditional ceasefire before any meaningful talks can even be considered.
That's the core deadlock. And it makes that May 15th date highly uncertain. We don't know if Putin would even attend personally.
Right.
And even if they did meet with such opposing preconditions, the chance of any real progress seems, frankly, very slim right now.
It really does. So, listener, as we wrap this up, maybe the question to leave you with is this. Given these incredibly entrenched positions, the ongoing war, these demands that seem impossible to reconcile, what could a truly workable path to a sustainable peace actually look like? What kind of compromises, however painful, might eventually be needed from all sides to get there? It's a tough one, no easy answers, but thinking about the different viewpoints we've discussed is maybe a starting point for understanding this huge ongoing challenge.